The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains of Colorado Territory as Abigail Crawford clung to the side of the stagecoach, her knuckles white against the polished wood. It was 1875, and she just witnessed 3 masked bandits fall dead in the dirt, courtesy of the tall stranger who had appeared from nowhere astride a midnight black stallion. "Madam, are you hurt?" The man dismounted in one fluid motion, his voice a deep rumble that somehow cut through her terror. His eyes, green as summer sage, scanned her for injuries. Abigail managed to shake her head, her breath coming in short gasps. She had arrived in the West only yesterday, a proper Boston lady with starched collars and carefully pinned hair. Now her expensive traveling dress was torn and dusty, her carefully packed trunks scattered across the ground. "My name is Griff Sloane," the stranger said, removing his hat to reveal sun-streaked brown hair. "Most folks call me Griff." "Abigail Crawford," she replied automatically, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was traveling to Denver." Griff surveyed the scene with practiced eyes. The stagecoach driver lay dead, and so did the man who'd been riding shotgun. The other passengers, an elderly couple and a traveling salesman, huddled together in shock. "Denver's still 20 miles north," Griff said. "My ranch is just over that ridge. You can all rest there tonight." His eyes returned to Abigail, taking in her fine clothes and delicate features. "Where are you headed after Denver, Miss Crawford?" "Nowhere," she answered, the admission burning her throat. "I have nowhere to go." Griff nodded, not pressing further. He helped the elderly couple to their feet and gathered what luggage could be salvaged. As Abigail retrieved her own small valise from the dust, she felt his eyes on her again. "You're a long way from home," he observed. She stood straighter, shoulders square despite her exhaustion. "I no longer have a home, Mr. Sloane." The ride to the Sloane ranch was mercifully short. Abigail rode double with Griff, perched uncomfortably before him in the saddle, his arms creating a protective cage around her as he held the reins. The elderly couple followed on their horse, while the salesman rode the spare mount Griff had brought along. The Sloane ranch sprawled across a verdant valley, a substantial 2-story house of sturdy timber standing proudly amidst a collection of outbuildings. Cattle dotted the surrounding pastures, and 3 ranch hands appeared as they approached, curious about the unexpected guests. "Jackson." Griff called to a weather-beaten man with a salt and pepper beard. "We've got survivors from a stagecoach robbery. Send someone to alert the sheriff in town." Abigail was ushered into the house by a plump woman introduced as Mrs. Haversham, the housekeeper. She was led to a comfortable bedroom where a copper tub was filled with steaming water. After washing away the dust and blood of the day, Abigail changed into a simple dress Mrs. Haversham had lent her. When she descended the stairs, she found Griff in the dining room speaking in low tones with his foreman. He stood when she entered, his expression softening. "You look better," he said simply. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Sloane," Abigail replied formally. "I'm afraid I've imposed on your kindness far too much already." "Nonsense. You've been through an ordeal." He pulled out a chair for her. "Please eat something." The meal was simple but hearty: beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. The elderly couple had already retired to their room, overcome by the day's events, and the salesman was engrossed in conversation with one of the ranch hands about local business prospects. "You mentioned you have nowhere to go," Griff said quietly, his eyes meeting hers across the table. "If you don't mind my asking, what brings a Boston lady like yourself to Colorado Territory with no destination?" Abigail hesitated, her spoon suspended above her bowl. "How did you know I'm from Boston?" The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Your accent. And those fancy boots aren't made for Western trails." She set her spoon down, suddenly lacking appetite. "I came west because there was nothing left for me in Boston. My father died 6 months ago, leaving substantial debts. Our home and possessions were sold to satisfy his creditors." "I'm sorry for your loss," Griff said, genuine sympathy in his voice. "I had an aunt in Denver who offered me a place to stay," Abigail continued, "but I received word during my journey that she passed away last week." "So you truly have nowhere to go," Griff murmured. "I have some money," she said quickly, pride coloring her cheeks. "Not much, but enough to secure lodgings in Denver until I find employment." Griff studied her for a long moment. "What kind of employment does a Boston society lady seek in Denver?" Abigail's chin lifted slightly. "I'm educated. I can read, write, and do arithmetic. I could work as a shopkeeper's assistant or perhaps a schoolteacher." "We need a schoolteacher here," Griff said suddenly. "In Pinecrest, that's our town, about 5 miles east. The last teacher left 2 months ago to get married. The children have had no formal education since." "Are you offering me a position, Mr. Sloane?" Abigail asked, surprised. "I'm on the town council. We've been looking for someone suitable." He leaned forward, those green eyes intent. "The pay isn't much, but there's a small house that comes with the position. You'd be independence." The word resonated within her. Wasn't that what she'd been seeking when she left Boston? "I'd need to meet with the rest of the council," Griff continued. "But given your education and, well, your current circumstances, I think they'd agree to give you a chance." "Why would you do this for me?" Abigail asked softly. "You don't know me." Griff's gaze remained steady. "Everyone deserves a chance to build a life, Miss Crawford. Even Boston ladies who find themselves lost in Colorado." The next morning, Abigail awoke to the sounds of a working ranch, the lowing of cattle, men calling to one another, the rhythmic pounding of a hammer on metal from the blacksmith's forge. For a moment, she lay still, remembering the elegant silence of her Boston home, where servants moved quietly and street noises were muffled by thick curtains and solid walls. She dressed in her own clothes, now cleaned and pressed by Mrs. Haversham, and made her way downstairs. Griff was already gone, the housekeeper informed her, but he had left instructions for Jackson to escort her to town after breakfast to meet the school board. Pinecrest was a small but growing settlement nestled against the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. The main street boasted a general store, a bank, a hotel, 2 saloons, a church, and various other businesses catering to both the town residents and surrounding ranchers. The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a simple one-room building with a bell tower. The school board consisted of 3 men besides Griff, the minister, the bank manager, and a gruff rancher named Hollister. They questioned Abigail thoroughly about her education and teaching experience, which was limited to tutoring younger cousins. The minister seemed particularly concerned about her moral character, while Hollister openly doubted whether a city girl could handle the rough-and-tumble ranch children. To Abigail's surprise, Griff defended her, pointing out her quick thinking during the stagecoach robbery and her obvious intelligence. In the end, they agreed to hire her for a 3-month trial period. "The schoolhouse needs cleaning before term starts next week," Griff told her as they left the meeting. "And the teacher's cottage hasn't been lived in for a while. It'll need some work." "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Sloane," Abigail replied, gazing at the small cottage adjacent to the schoolhouse. It was weathered but solidly built, with a small front porch and 2 windows facing the street. "I never thought you were," he answered with a small smile. "You can stay at the ranch until the cottage is ready." Over the next few days, Abigail threw herself into preparing both the schoolhouse and cottage. She scrubbed floors, washed windows, and repaired what she could. Several townswomen, curious about the new teacher, came to help, bringing spare household items and offering advice about dealing with the local children. Griff appeared each evening to check on her progress, often bringing tools or materials she needed. One evening, he arrived with a rocking chair strapped to his horse. "Every teacher needs a proper chair," he said gruffly when she exclaimed over it. "Found it in the attic at the ranch. Nobody's using it." Abigail ran her hands over the smooth wood, touched by his thoughtfulness. "It's perfect." "Thank you." As they stood on the porch in the fading light, Griff's expression turned serious. "School starts Monday. Are you ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be," she admitted. "I'm nervous but excited too. "You'll do fine," he said with a confidence that bolstered her own. "These kids need someone who cares. I can already see that you do." Abigail's first day of teaching was chaotic but exhilarating. Her class consisted of 23 children ranging in age from 6 to 16 with widely varying levels of education. Some of the older boys were initially resistant, particularly Seth Hollister, the rancher's son, who declared that school was a waste of time when he could be working cattle. By the end of the first week, Abigail was exhausted but determined. She'd made progress with most of the children, even Seth, whom she'd challenged to improve his mathematics so he could better manage his father's ranch accounts someday. When Griff stopped by Friday afternoon as the children were leaving, she was erasing the chalkboard, her sleeves rolled up and her hair coming loose from its pins. "How was your first week, Miss Crawford?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. She turned, a genuine smile lighting her face. "Challenging, frustrating at times, but wonderful too." When little Emma Parker finally understood how to read that passage today, her face. Abigail trailed off, emotion catching in her throat. Griff nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's why teaching matters." "You're making a difference already." "I hope so," she said softly. "I want to belong here, to contribute something meaningful." "You already belong," Griff said simply, "more than you know." As autumn progressed, Abigail settled into life in Pinecrest. Her students were making steady progress, and she'd been invited to join various community activities, church socials, quilting bees, even a barn raising at the Peterson farm. She still felt like an outsider at times, especially when conversations turned to cattle drives or hunting expeditions, topics entirely foreign to her Boston upbringing. Griff remained a steady presence in her life, stopping by the schoolhouse regularly to fix a leaky roof or replace a broken window. Sometimes he brought books for her small classroom library or interesting specimens for science lessons, unusual rocks, pressed wildflowers, once even a hawk's feather. One Saturday in late October, he appeared at her cottage door with his horse saddled and a spare mount beside him. "Get your coat," he said without preamble. "I want to show you something." Curious, Abigail complied, donning her warmest coat and the practical riding boots she'd purchased from the general store. Griff helped her mount the gentle mare he'd brought, then led the way out of town, heading west toward the mountains. They rode for nearly an hour, climbing steadily into the foothills. The aspens had turned golden, their leaves shimmering in the autumn sunlight. Finally, Griff reined in at a promontory overlooking a vast valley. "This is my favorite place," he said as Abigail gasped at the view. Miles of rugged beauty stretched before them, pine-covered slopes giving way to the distant peaks of the Rockies, their summits already dusted with early snow. "It's magnificent," she breathed, dismounting to stand at the edge of the overlook. "I've never seen anything like it." "Different from Boston, I imagine," Griff said, coming to stand beside her. "Boston has its own beauty," Abigail replied. "But this is freedom." They stood in companionable silence, watching an eagle soar on thermal currents above the valley. Abigail was acutely aware of Griff beside her, his tall frame, the scent of leather and pine that seemed to cling to him, the quiet strength he radiated. "Why did you really bring me here?" she asked finally, turning to face him. Griff's eyes, usually so confident, held a hint of uncertainty. "I wanted you to see what I see, to understand why I could never leave this place." He gestured toward the panorama. "Some folks come west thinking it's just a stopover, somewhere to make their fortune before heading back east. But for some of us, this is home in a way no other place could ever be." "And you think I'm just passing through?" Abigail asked, a trace of hurt in her voice. "Are you?" His gaze was penetrating now. "You've been here 2 months, Abigail. The children adore you, the town respects you. But sometimes I see you looking east toward the horizon, like you're thinking of what you left behind." Abigail turned back to the view, considering his words. "I do think of Boston sometimes," she admitted. "Not because I want to return, but because I'm still adjusting to how different everything is here." In Boston, I knew exactly who I was supposed to be, what was expected of me. Here, she spread her hands. Here I'm still finding my place. And what if your place is here? Griff asked quietly. What if you belong in Colorado more than you ever belonged in Boston? The question hung between them, laden with meaning Abigail wasn't quite ready to acknowledge. She busied herself with adjusting her gloves. We should head back. It'll be dark soon. Griff nodded, accepting her deflection, but as he helped her back onto her horse, his hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary. November brought the first heavy snowfall and with it, new challenges for Abigail. The walk to the schoolhouse became treacherous, and keeping the building warm enough for lessons consumed much of her time and energy. Several of her students from outlying ranches couldn't make it to school at all when the weather was particularly harsh. One stormy afternoon, as Abigail was dismissing the children early due to worsening conditions, Griff appeared at the schoolhouse door, snow dusting his broad shoulders. I came to escort you home, he said, stamping his boots to dislodge the snow. The path is getting dangerous. Abigail accepted his arm gratefully as they made their way through deepening drifts to her cottage. Inside, she busied herself making coffee while Griff built up the fire in her small stove. You need more firewood, he observed, eyeing her dwindling supply, Mr. Jenkins at the general store promised to deliver some tomorrow, she said, handing him a steaming cup. Griff accepted the coffee but frowned. Jenkins overcharges for wood. I'll bring you some from the ranch tomorrow. You don't need to do that, Abigail protested. You've done so much for me already. I want to, he said simply. As they sat before the stove, warming their hands around their cups, Abigail studied Griff's profile, the strong jaw, the slight crease between his brows as he gazed into the flames. Why do you keep helping me? She asked softly. Griff turned to face her, his expression serious. Because from the moment I saw you clinging to that stagecoach, something inside me knew you were important. He set his cup down carefully. I've never been one for pretty words, Abigail. But these past months, watching you build a life here, seeing your kindness with the children, your determination, I find myself thinking about you when you're not around. Abigail's heart quickened. Griff, let me finish, he said gently. I know you're still finding your way here. I know Boston society probably had very different ideas about courtship than we do in Pinecrest, but I'd like to court you properly if you'd allow it. Abigail's fingers tightened around her cup. I don't know if I can give you what you want. I don't know if I belong in your world, Griff. Everything here is still so foreign to me. You belong wherever you choose to belong, he said firmly. And if you choose Pinecrest, if you choose me, I promise to make a place for you that feels like home. Before she could respond, a violent gust of wind rattled the windows, making them both start. Griff rose reluctantly. I should go before this gets worse. At the door, he turned back. Think about what I said, Abigail. There's no rush. After he left, Abigail sat for a long time before the stove, her thoughts in turmoil. Griff Sloane was everything a woman could want: kind, honorable, steadfast, and she couldn't deny the flutter in her chest whenever he was near. But could she truly make a life here, so far from everything familiar? The Thanksgiving holiday brought a welcome break from school and an invitation to dinner at the Sloane Ranch. Abigail arrived with an apple pie she'd baked herself, a skill newly acquired under Mrs. Haversham's tutelage. The ranch house was transformed, every surface polished, candles glowing in silver holders, the long dining table set with what Abigail recognized as fine china. Several of Griff's ranch hands were present with their families, along with Jackson and Mrs. Haversham. You've gone to a lot of trouble, Abigail murmured to Griff as he took her coat. He looked almost embarrassed. Mrs. Haversham insisted, said it was high time the ranch hosted a proper holiday dinner. The meal was abundant and delicious: roast turkey, venison, mashed potatoes, 3 kinds of pie. As Griff carved the turkey at the head of the table, Abigail was struck by how at ease he seemed in the role of host, how naturally he led the brief prayer of thanksgiving before the meal. Later, as the other guests gathered in the parlor for music and conversation, Griff drew Abigail aside to show her his study. It was a cozy room lined with bookshelves, a large desk positioned to take advantage of the light from a west-facing window. "You have quite a collection," Abigail said, running her fingers along the spines of volumes ranging from practical ranching manuals to classics of literature. "My mother loved books," Griff explained. "She taught me to read before I was 5. Said a man needed to exercise his mind as well as his body." "She sounds like a wise woman," Abigail said softly. "Are your parents both gone?" Griff said. "Father died in a flash flood 10 years ago. Mother followed a year later, heart trouble, the doctor said, but I think it was grief." "I'm sorry," Abigail said, instinctively reaching out to touch his arm. "It must have been difficult taking over the ranch so young." Griff covered her hand with his own. "It was, but they raised me to be responsible, to care for what was mine." His eyes held hers. "To protect what matters." The moment stretched between them, intimate despite the sounds of laughter and piano music drifting from the parlor. Abigail became acutely aware of how close they were standing, of the warmth of his hand over hers. "Griff," she began uncertainly, "about what you said before, Miss Crawford." Little Emma Parker burst into the study, her face alight with excitement. "Mrs. Haversham is playing the piano and wants to know if you'll sing for us. She says all Boston ladies know how to sing." The spell broken, Abigail smiled at her enthusiastic student. "I'd be happy to sing, Emma." "Let's not keep everyone waiting." As December arrived, bringing with it preparations for Christmas, Abigail found herself increasingly torn. On one hand, she'd grown to love her little schoolhouse, her students, and the tight-knit community of Pinecrest. On the other, the holiday season brought sharp pangs of homesickness for Boston's familiar traditions, the carolers on Beacon Hill, midnight service at Trinity Church, the elaborate decorations in the shop windows along Washington Street. She threw herself into organizing a Christmas pageant with her students, hoping the activity would distract her from her melancholy. The entire town was invited to attend the performance, scheduled for the last day of school before the holiday break. 3 days before the pageant, a letter arrived from Boston from Eleanor Whitney, Abigail's dearest childhood friend. Eleanor wrote of her recent engagement to a prominent banker, of the round of parties being held in their honor, and of her wish that Abigail could return for the spring wedding. "I know you're building a new life in that wilderness," Eleanor wrote, "but surely you could come home for a few months. Father says he could easily secure you a position as a governess in one of the better households if you wish to return permanently. After all, Abigail dear, what future can there possibly be for you among those rough frontiersmen?" The letter left Abigail restless and unsettled. That evening she walked to the edge of town, where the land began its gentle rise toward the mountains. The setting sun painted the snow-covered peaks in shades of gold and rose, a sight that still took her breath away after months in Colorado. She didn't hear the approach of hoofbeats until Griff's voice called out, "Abigail, what are you doing out here alone? It's getting dark." She turned to find him dismounting, concern etched on his features. "I needed to think," she said simply. "About what?" He came to stand beside her, following her gaze to the mountains. "I received a letter from Boston today from my friend Eleanor. Bad news?" he asked. "No, good news actually. She's getting married in the spring." Abigail hesitated. "She wants me to come back for the wedding, perhaps to stay." Griff's expression stilled. "And do you want to go back?" "I don't know," Abigail admitted. "When I read her letter, describing the familiar streets, the people I've known all my life, I felt such longing. But then I came out here, looked at these mountains, thought of my students." She turned to face him fully. "I feel caught between two worlds, Griff. I don't fully belong in either one." Griff was silent for a long moment, his gaze never leaving her face. "You belong where you choose to belong," he said finally, echoing his words from weeks before. "But Abigail, I need you to know that if you choose Pinecrest, if you choose to stay, you won't be caught between worlds anymore. You'll be home." "How can you be so certain?" she whispered. "Because I love you," he said simply. "I've loved you since that day at the Overlook, maybe even before. And I believe you could love me too if you gave yourself permission to put down roots here." Abigail's heart pounded in her chest. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Afraid of choosing wrong, of regretting my decision, of disappointing those who care about me. What does your heart tell you?" Griff asked softly. Before she could answer, the church bell began to ring urgently, the town's signal for emergency. They both turned toward the sound. "Something's wrong," Griff said, already moving toward his horse. "Come on." They rode double back to town, where a crowd had gathered outside the schoolhouse. To Abigail's horror, smoke was pouring from the windows. "The Christmas decorations," she cried as Griff helped her down. "We left candles on the tree for the pageant rehearsal." A bucket brigade had already formed, passing water from the town pump to the men dousing the flames. Abigail pushed through the crowd, frantic to save the children's handmade ornaments, the costumes they'd worked so hard on, the precious books in her small library. "Abigail, no." Griff caught her arm as she tried to enter the building. "It's too dangerous." "But everything we've worked for," she began, "is just things," he finished firmly. "Things can be replaced, you can't." As they watched helplessly, the fire spread despite the townspeople's efforts. By the time it was finally extinguished, the schoolhouse was a charred shell, the roof collapsed, the windows shattered by heat. Abigail stood silent amid the crowd, shock and disbelief washing over her. Her students gathered around her, some crying, others staring wide-eyed at the destruction. "What about our Christmas pageant, Miss Crawford?" little Emma asked, her voice quavering. "I don't know, sweetheart," Abigail answered honestly. "The costumes, the decorations, they're all gone." "We'll hold it at the ranch," Griff announced suddenly. All eyes turned to him. "The great room is big enough. We still have 3 days. We can make new costumes, new decorations." But Abigail began. "No buts," Griff said firmly. "Christmas is about hope and new beginnings. We're not letting a fire rob these children of their celebration." The next 3 days were a whirlwind of activity. The entire town rallied around the effort to save the Christmas pageant. Women gathered at the ranch to sew new costumes, men constructed a makeshift stage in Griff's great room, and children practiced their parts with renewed determination. Abigail worked alongside everyone else, but part of her remained distracted, her thoughts returning again and again to Griff's declaration and her own unresolved feelings. The destruction of the schoolhouse had shaken her more deeply than she cared to admit. It felt like a sign, but of what, she wasn't sure. On Christmas Eve, the ranch house was transformed. Evergreen boughs decorated every surface, candles glowed in the windows, and a massive Christmas tree stood in the corner of the great room, adorned with simple ornaments hastily crafted from paper, pine cones, and bits of ribbon. The pageant was far from perfect. Lines were forgotten, costumes slipped, and the makeshift curtain stuck halfway through its opening, but the children's enthusiasm and the audience's goodwill made it a roaring success nonetheless. When little Emma, dressed as an angel with wings fashioned from flour sacks, led the children in Silent Night, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Afterward, as the townspeople enjoyed refreshments and conversation, Abigail slipped away to the porch, needing a moment alone. The night was clear and cold, stars glittering like diamonds above the snow-covered landscape. She heard the door open behind her and knew without turning that it was Griff. He draped a warm blanket around her shoulders before coming to stand beside her at the railing. "The children were wonderful," he said softly. "They were," she agreed, turning to face him. "Thank you for saving their Christmas, for saving mine too." Griff's expression was tender in the moonlight. "I'd do anything to see you smile, Abigail Crawford. I know," she whispered. "That's what frightens me." "Why would that frighten you?" "Because I don't deserve such devotion," she admitted. "I've been so uncertain, so afraid to commit to this place, to you. Even after all you've done, part of me still feels like I don't belong here." Griff took her hands in his touch gentle despite the calluses earned from years of ranch work. "Abigail, belonging isn't about deserving, it's about choosing. It's about finding the place and the person that makes your heart feel at home. I said I don't belong, she quoted softly, remembering their conversation at the edge of town. The cowboy answered, his voice low and certain, "You belong with me." In that moment, looking into Griff's eyes, Abigail felt something shift inside her, a settling, a certainty she'd been searching for since leaving Boston. This man, this place, they were no longer foreign. Somehow, without her noticing, they had become essential. "I do," she whispered, reaching up to touch his face. "I belong with you, Griff Sloane. I love you." His kiss was gentle at first, then deepening with a passion that made her heart race. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Marry me," Griff said, his voice husky. "Not because you have nowhere else to go, but because you've chosen to make your home here with me." "Yes," Abigail answered without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you." They were wed on New Year's Day, 1876, in the newly rebuilt schoolhouse. The entire town turned out for the celebration, which lasted well into the night. Abigail wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Mrs. Haversham and the other women had secretly sewn for her, with pine branches and winter berries in her hair instead of the traditional orange blossoms. As they danced their first dance as husband and wife, Griff whispered, "Are you happy, Mrs. Sloane?" Abigail's heart swelled with joy as she looked around at the faces of her students, her friends, her new family. "Completely," she answered truthfully. "I never imagined finding such happiness so far from where I began." "This is just the beginning," Griff promised. "We have our whole lives ahead of us." Spring brought renewal to both the land and the town of Pinecrest. The schoolhouse, rebuilt larger and sturdier than before, now boasted real glass windows and proper desks for the students. Abigail continued teaching, riding to and from the ranch each day on a gentle mare Griff had trained especially for her. In April, a letter arrived from Boston from Eleanor, expressing her disappointment that Abigail wouldn't be attending her wedding, but offering surprisingly warm congratulations on her marriage. "Perhaps someday," Eleanor wrote, "I might venture west to see this wild country that has stolen my dearest friend's heart." "Would you like that?" Griff asked as Abigail read him the letter over breakfast. "To have your Boston friends visit, I would," Abigail admitted. "But not because I miss Boston or regret my choice. I want them to see the beauty I've found here, to understand why I fell in love with this place." She reached across the table to take his hand. "With you," Griff's smile was tender. "Then we'll welcome them whenever they come." "Your past is part of who you are, Abigail. I'd never ask you to forget it." "I know," she said softly. "That's one of the countless reasons I love you." Summer brought cattle drives and the hard work of ranch life, but also picnics by the creek, wildflowers blooming across the meadows, and long evenings sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains. Abigail learned to ride properly, to bake bread in the temperamental ranch oven, and even, to her surprise, to shoot a rifle accurately enough to defend herself if needed. In late August, as they rode together to their special overlook, Abigail had news of her own to share. As they dismounted and settled on a fallen log to enjoy the view, she took Griff's hand and placed it gently on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby," she said, watching his face carefully. "In early spring." Griff's expression transformed from surprise to wonder to pure joy. He gathered her in his arms, his kiss fierce and tender all at once. "A baby," he repeated in awe, "our child." "Are you happy?" Abigail asked, though his reaction had already answered her question. "Beyond words," he replied, his hand still resting protectively over their unborn child. "You've given me everything I never knew I wanted, Abigail, a true partner, a love I never thought possible, and now a family of our own." As they sat together, watching the eagle soar over the valley that had become her home, Abigail reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From a proper Boston lady to a Colorado rancher's wife, from lost and alone to found and beloved. "What are you thinking?" Griff asked, his arm warm around her shoulders. "I'm thinking about belonging," she said, leaning into his embrace. about how sometimes we find our true home in the most unexpected places. Griff kissed her temple gently. And sometimes, he murmured, it finds us. In the years that followed, Abigail and Griff built a life rich with love, challenge, and purpose. Their family grew first with the birth of their daughter, Catherine, followed 2 years later by twin boys, James and William. The Sloane Ranch prospered under their joint stewardship, with Abigail's Eastern education complementing Griff's practical knowledge in ways neither could have anticipated. Abigail continued teaching until the twins were born, then reluctantly gave up her formal position at the schoolhouse. But her dedication to education never wavered. She taught her own children, tutored the ranch hands who wanted to learn to read, and eventually helped establish a proper school board and curriculum for the growing town of Pinecrest. And on quiet evenings when the children were asleep and the day's work done, Abigail and Griff would often sit on their porch, hands entwined, watching the sun set behind the mountains they both loved. Any regrets? Griff would sometimes ask, though he already knew the answer. And Abigail would smile, remembering that lost young woman who had clung to a stagecoach so long ago, and answer truthfully, "Not one. This is exactly where I belong."